Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Hilton and he's Matt Pippin Auletta. And today we're talking week 8, a 25-16 win for the Empire over the Boston Glory at home in a game that co-head coach Anthony Nunez let me know was the first game where the Empire won all 4 quarters at home in a very long time. And I didn't get the chance actually to look it up, but of the little digging I did do, as then I kept going through box scores and things, it has been a while. But the first question I have today for you, Matt, can you give some context to the number 26 consecutive home wins? Over 5 years, how can we not take the number 26 for granted?
It's tough. I mean, winning that much in a row, regardless of how good the team is, it's not easy, and it's not like they've played bad competition the whole time. I mean, there are some great teams that they just keep eking out these wins. I mean, there's universe point buzzer beaters against DC. There's the crazy playoff game against Atlanta. There are some really tough games. They just seem to kind of eke them out no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I think of I was the Raleigh double overtime a part of it. I mean, the last loss was May of 2018 against Montreal, which again we remember that game, and I believe it was Nasser Vogel, who would then go on to be an Empire player later on. He just had a fantastic game. Quinton Bonneau went off completely. What was it? Steve Bonneau also went off completely in that game. So it was unrelated to one another, but it was the Bonneau. Again, different spellings as well, by the way. So Bonneau just went nuts in that game, and that was the difference there. But now we go
There's
ahead.
a chance. Wait. I got to cut you off. I'm sorry. There's a chance I got kicked out of that game. I'm gonna double check.
There's not a chance. You don't have to.
Is that the one? That's the one.
100% get kicked out of that game.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a good one. It was a memorable one for you, memorable one for everybody. But yeah, I mean, if you had known that it was the last time that they would lose in 26 consecutive home games, would you have gotten yourself kicked out? I think the same thing happens.
They needed me out there for those last few minutes. That's what it comes down to. Bunch of scrubs without me.
Yeah, for sure. But fortunately, transitioning back to Boston, you were up in the booth with me nowadays, and you got to see again the next generation of Empire players. Because I think the one player we start with, but Jack Williams winds up doing the interview. He had the best plus minus in the game, or +7. But the player of the game, as awarded by the New York Empire, was Oliver Chartock, who had just 4 O points, 10 D points, so played just 14 points in the game, but he had 2 goals, 3 blocks, and he was a +5, which was in that next category of players. Again, it was a +7 for Jack, and then a few had a +5 in the contest. And again, for Oliver Chartock, I mean, maybe the best game of his career. I think certainly he has been interesting to me. We brought it up on the broadcast because he's the one player on the Empire. Again, 4 O points and 10 D points puts him, basically at about 50 points on both O and D, and he's the only player that realistically splits time. He's the only one. If the O-line needs somebody, it's him, and of course he's going to play in that 20. He's no longer a scratch or a dressed. He is in the 20 every week and playing on that D-line if everybody in the O-line is healthy and available.
Yeah, he's obviously they could bring over Yacht. He could easily be in the same position of splitting time if they really needed him. But he's found a nice
Randolph too. It's Randolph the same way. Yeah.
And actually, when Jeff got a little banged up in the end of the third quarter, that they did pull over some of those guys to fill in a few O points, and it was seamless and it went well. But yeah, Chartock, Oliver, he's been playing great. He's a big body. He's versatile. He's a great thrower. He's obviously a good defender. He does everything, which is what a lot of Empire players can do. But yeah, he just seems to be fitting in very seamlessly, regardless of where it's asked. And, he's a great offensive player. So having him on the D-line, gives him a little punch after a turn. But obviously he can also just go in and play offense and is contributing just as seamlessly.
Well, how difficult is it, I think, for opposing teams to scout him? Like last year, he wasn't in the 20 enough. He was more in the second half of the season, but he wasn't in the 20 enough where he's going to be in any particular scouting report, even when he switches to the O-line. Like you prepare for the 20, those don't come out till Thursday. So you'd expect that other teams, they know the 7 who the Empire are starting with. You also have to take your time if you're the opposition to scout for Yacht and Antoine Davis. And even defensively, you're saying, okay, how do we deal with Yacht? How do we deal with Ben Katz? Those poaches? How do we deal with Marquez Brown-Lee with the flat mark? And there's these different permutations that the Empire have on D. I mean, I think we can almost transition to talking about the two draw spreaders for a minute here because I mean, you've done the scout, you've worked on these things. How long did the scout has to be for you to get down to Oliver and Mike and Ryan? So by that time, teams aren't preparing for what Mike Dross has done close to 200 times. Again, with those 2 blocks, he is now just 2 away from 200, and Ryan is just 7 away from 200. And again, even with those gaudy numbers, because of, again, them being inflated earlier on, I think in their careers, 2013, 14, and 15, you don't scout for defensively what Mike Dross and Ryan Dross and Oliver Chartock do. And that's why I think they have the opportunity to, again, kind of not to say surprise everybody, because we're not surprised, but the opposition seemed to be surprised when Ryan Dross has a layout block, or Mike gets that poach on the swing like he always does, or Oliver Chartock gets you on a hand block. Like you don't prepare for those things.
I mean, you can't really prepare for just getting outrun on some layout Ds or hand blocks. I mean, you can't just yell, hey, get a hand block, or hey, don't get a hand block. I mean, that doesn't really. But, in terms of scouting, one of the things that I've noticed that not just this year, but in general, the best offenses in the league don't necessarily run 7 players every single point. They have typically 8, 9 players that they rotate in, and just giving those 1 or 2 extra wrinkles, even if those, 8th and 9th players aren't playing quite as many points, even if they're only playing, maybe 10-0 points or whatever, just giving that extra look, it kind of just shifts everything, and it shifts all the assignments. And that, it keeps defenses on their toes. You can't just lock in and have, your D1 or most of your better players being like, okay, I'm going to cover so-and-so every single point, and I'm going to get used to it. You might be covering somebody for a bit, and then all of a sudden there's Yacht on the O-line, or then there's Chartock on the second Chartock on the O-line, and you have to shift your assignments one by one. It just keeps everything a little fresh, and you get different looks because Oliver's not going to do the same thing that Yacht is going to do or that Babbitt's going to do, but he fills in just as seamless.
But do you think it gets ahead in the head? I mean, you were an O-line handler here, so like when other teams are scouting you, does it make you think when you have, let's say, a Ben Yacht or an Antoine Davis on you about how far you step out? Like, do you think that it comes down to even focus at times where, let's say, Oliver, I'm not trying to throw Ryan Cable under the bus here with the hand block. Obviously, he just happened to be that player in that moment, but that's not. But for Oliver on the mark, do you think that other teams or other players who, again, are just O-line players, they will say, okay, it's not Ben Yacht, it's not Antoine Davis. Not say that I can go lighter, but maybe I don't need to step all the way around. Or the focus, do you think the focus does lessen a little bit based on the matchup and the personnel? Because again, I think even for me, like, I mean, you know what I mean? We play leagues and stuff. I know who's who, right? So if XYZ is on me, like if a player like you is on me, it's a little different than if somebody who I don't know or just joined the league or something is on me. And the level of focus I have on the step outs, and I have to make sure if you're guarding me that, yeah, I'm getting completely around you, and I'm making sure that I'm really throwing in a shoulder fake and making sure that you're biting and finding that space. But again, if it's somebody else, I say, okay, I know that maybe they're not going to shift to the backhand. I'm just going to take that chance. Do you think it's a little bit of that for just, taking that lessen the focus?
That is a real thing that could happen. I mean, yeah, I've been point blocked at league when I thought, who is this? And then all of a sudden it's some fast, wiry guy and he point blocks me. I'm like, oh, I really should have stepped out or, done what I needed to do. And, that does happen at a higher level too. Sometimes you don't necessarily know what somebody's capable of until you've seen them a few times. And, Cable is a big guy with a long wingspan. I mean, I'm sure he's not getting point blocked that often. He can step around when he needs to, whatever. But sometimes you might just think, okay, I can just pop this over somebody. I'm big, no big deal. But Oliver Chartock's not small. I actually played against him a few points at just like some little holiday mini tournament that gets run in New York. And my first impression was, oh, he's a little bigger than I thought. Like, I definitely need to be cognizant of where I'm stepping out, how I'm throwing around him, especially because it was windy conditions. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly not small. You got to be aware of that. So a little lax, yeah. And Boston in general can't afford to be lax in these games. They need to, if they want to beat the New York Empire, they need to be dialed in for 99% of the time. They can't just be giving them D's like that.
Well, I think that's what made it tough for Boston, because they were much better in the second half, but the Empire also were up by 9 at points, and you could feel that the Empire don't purposely go into second gear like that, and it's not that Boston ever got it close. It was just as clinical as the O line for the Empire is, they just traded scores for basically the rest of the game. Again, they won every quarter anyway, so they still won 6-4, 6-4 in the third and the fourth. But for the point about Orion Cable, he had one goal in that first half, and it felt like defensively, especially, Ben Yot did his job. Ben Yot just pocketed him. He had the one goal, and then he had a fight for it, and then he had 5 in the second half. 2 of which, I mean, he really earned. He went and he got up over Ben Yot, and he earned those. And I think for that Yacht Cable matchup, I think it's totally fair for Cable to, again, this isn't denigrating Yacht's D in the second half. It's that Cable went out and earned it. And I think if you're Boston, it's so interesting because we'll talk about the third playoff spot later. But Orion Cable has the potential and the ability to be the best player on the field. I mean, he does. Like he showed you in that second half that if he wants 5 goals, maybe he can get it. And I also want to remind people that he's in his early 20s. Like he is still a really young player. And I think that second half is almost exciting for just, I mean, maybe not necessarily Empire fans, but for people around the league watching the Boston Glory and saying, hey, I mean, while the rest of them are in their mid 20s and, some like Topher Davis have been around the block, they still have players like Orion Cable who feels like he's a known commodity because he's been there for 3 years, but he has a ways left to go up and up and up and up and up. And a reminder that he only played 3 games last year even. So he's already played way more than he played last year, and he's going to continue to improve. So I think that is certainly something exciting for fans of the AUDL because Orion Cable does have that upper limit. But to me, it just feels like everything in him is that mental part. And you see this, like, guys don't necessarily have that killer instinct, right? And I think that is something that's always set the Mike Dross and the Ryan Dross and those kind of cats apart because they always seem to they turn that switch and they flip that switch on and now it's on. I think for Orion, it just seems like early in his career that switch he can flip it on. Obviously, he did it at UMass. Now he's at Champlain College, so they don't necessarily do that. But now playing the AUDL, seems like that switch flips on sometimes, and he really has to just figure out how do I have that switch always on.
Yeah, early in the game, Yacht really just smothered him. He would start to cut, and it just looked like there was never any separation. I think if Cable is to be thought of as high as his ceiling might be, he feel like he needs to gain some sort of either quicker first step or just some more like top end speed or just maybe more conviction in his cuts. Like you said, that killer instinct. I felt like some of the cuts he was making in the first half, he would start in, 1 or 2 step fake, start to go the other way. And just Empire players, mostly Yacht, just like were never concerned and just stayed right next to him the whole time. They never got faked out by that. It wasn't, there was just no separation gained on those. So then Boston had to look elsewhere to move the disc. And that's why he only scored 1 goal in the first half. I mean, he was blanketed the entire time. In the second half, Boston did some other things offensively that I think helped free up a little space, which then gave Cable the room he needed. And, again, he did have to sky Yacht a few times, which was very exciting for, fans in the booth, everything. But it's not like he was just wide open scoring easy open goals. I mean, sometimes when you watch Babbitt or some other players around the league, Lithio, whoever, even just other Empire players, when they are running out in space, they're scoring super easy goals and there's no defender in sight. I mean, Cable did have to go up over, one of the best defensive players in the league in Yacht. So, he did, and he made great catches. Props to him for those. It was exciting. It's what it was, you wanted to see that, but he's not just out in space scoring the easiest goals imaginable. I mean, Yacht was still right there on a lot of them.
Well, I mean, I do think that for big guys, especially, the scouting report has become kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that if you're tall and have been tall for a long time, you were likely labeled as a cutter. You were kind of put in a box when you were younger. And these AUDL defenses are too smart. Like they know to force you to the sideline. And then when you come under on the sideline, especially the Empire, they're switching so quickly that they put that other guy to guard that under, even on the sideline. So even if you're getting on the sideline, it's a pressure situation. Then you receive it. And now, I mean, Yacht had 2 turnovers in that game because Boston did the same thing to him when they turned it over, that being Boston. Even their O-line, which did struggle to play defense, they pushed Yacht out wide, and his turnovers generally always come from from the sidelines, right? And you do that, you see that with big men around the league. And Lithio is so interesting because Lithio is, you've seen him over 3 years gain confidence with his throws. And so he picks up on those, high double teams with gigantic arms and limbs, to try to box them in with that big hammer. But even Lithio, they try to force him out to the wing. And I think Babbitt is so interesting because Babbitt is such a cheat code, because even against Boston, before he was knocked out of the game, getting poked in the eye, thankfully, again, here's an update here. Past concussion protocol. It was a little bit of a concern right away by him, but the trainer checked him out. He was poked in the eye, unfortunately, so we wouldn't be seeing a bit of an eye patch Babbitt, which again, I don't want to deal with eye patch Babbitt either. That sounds scary to me. Intimidating enough. But the point is that Babbitt seems to be one of the cheat codes where they try to force him wide as a big man, just doesn't work. Like he makes space for himself infield, in between the even if you're forcing middle, like he's in that space. So for big men, you're gonna have to fight against this a little bit.
It's not only Jeff making that space though. It's also just the way the Empire offense moves the disc around. One of the things that Boston struggled with was, at times they had four handlers back, and it was just this like congested, ugly backfield, and they couldn't go side to side enough. So then Cable's kind of pigeonholed into, I have to cut here because the disc is stuck here. If Boston could have swung the disc, 20, 30 yards across the field, all of a sudden he can adjust his cut and he can go left, he can go right, he can go deep, he can attack a lot of different space. But he basically just had to cut in, cut out on like 1/3 of the field, and Yacht knows this, so he just smothered him. The Boston offense, when they had all those people in the backfield, it was ugly and it did not help. And one of the best ways to outplay the Empire defense, if you can say anybody's doing that, is you have to go side to side a bunch of times so that you can change the angle of attack. Because as good as Ryan and Mike and all these other speedy, crazy good defenders are, they can't cover the whole field. The field's gigantic. So you need to keep the disc moving side to side, and that's how you can find space, and that's how you can attack. And then, then Orion Cable makes a deep cut when you've already attacked some other side to side space, and then he scores he's 10 yards open, and he's not having a sky yacht. It gets just infinitely easier when you move the disc side to side like that. And, Empire's good at that, and Boston was not very good at that for a while. They had a few possessions later in the game where they did that. I actually mentioned on the broadcast, I thought they did a great job of going side to side, and then they scored probably their easiest goal of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. Yeah, using that width is essential and important, but sometimes you can use a little bit too much width. And I'm transitioning here because we already brought them up, Mike and Ryan. But as I said, Mike and Ryan, they both had one block in the game. So correction, I said 2 earlier, but one block, bringing Mike within 2 of 200 and Ryan within 7, as I said. But let's break down Mike's greatest to Cat Stevens, though, because I've also, by the way, Cat Stevens, 315 goals in his AUDL career. So while he doesn't score as many as he used to, he is still 4th on the all-time list, and will probably remain such by the end of this season, I think, looking at the numbers. But anyway, so somebody came over, one of the New York Empire fan regulars, shout out to Rob. Rob came over and said, was that the greatest play I've ever seen? And I said to Rob, actually, that was one of the more simple greatest I've ever seen. And then I talked to Mike afterwards too, and he was, not to say not impressed with himself, but usually if Mike is impressed with the play that he makes, he lets us know, right? But said no, like it was perfect. Jeff, like the way that disc floated, Mike knew he was in bounds. He knew it was going out of bounds, so he was able to time it perfectly, and he also had time to get around and put it back in. The real issue there, or the real bang part of that play, would have been if Boston was wiser to it and had put anybody in the end zone. Because if Cat doesn't catch that, then Oliver Chartock catches that. There were 2 Empire players who would have been able to catch that goal. And so that's a little bit on Boston. How are you not in your own end zone to break that up? Because, we saw it coming. I didn't, as much as I would love to get that call back if I had known it was going to be a greatest, still, like, it felt, I don't know, there was something that, it was not the most difficult greatest to do, and it wasn't the most amazing play just because it seemed, to call it greatest routine is unfair, but it felt literally like a routine greatest that you might practice.
As far as greatest go, not to discredit Mike here, but he timed it well. He trotted, floated, caught it, sent it back in pretty effortlessly. Sometimes people get very frantic when they try and throw it back in, and that throw gets all over the place, but it just seemed like he knew he had time, space, everything, and it was just perfect. If a greatest can be perfect and easy, that was it. And Cat was just there, ready to collect it nice and easy. So awesome play. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't think he was necessarily going to be able to do that. It was hard to tell from up in the booth if that was catchable, throw inable, doable. But yeah, it was awesome, but also relatively easy as far as a difficult play goes.
Yeah, it's just a perfect storm
Yeah.
in that way for that to happen. Again, like the block he had in the game was, to me, even more impressive because, again, that just it's more difficult to put your opponent under pressure and get that D or whatever. But all right, so some of the other numbers that we run through here. Randolph had a +5 with 3 goals and 2 assists. Jack Williams ended with 4 goals, 4 assists, and 1 block for a game high +7. Oscar had 6 assists. Babbitt had a quiet 2 goals and 1 block, but only quiet based on his previous few weeks. Again, two goals and 1 block is just fine. And Lithio had 4 goals, while Elliot Chartock had 4 assists. So, what's more interesting to me was that the conditions that we were seeing were unlike what the Empire have had for most of this season. So for them to score 25 goals isn't that nuts. It's not like Boston. I mean, Boston had also had weird conditions. So their goals against average was second lowest going into that game at around 17. And the Empire were at 12, which just completely breaks my brain. That's that means that weather had to have some kind of effect. Because again, their 12 goals against average went up because they gave up 16, which is again still insane. They've only given up 17 twice, and that's the most that they have allowed defensively. That's a different thing. But talking even about the O-line, again, Randolph started well on D, the Empire getting some breaks to deal with the fact that Boston's one break came on the very first point of the game, and then they never broke again. So for Randolph, coming in the fourth quarter as well for Babbitt, a little bit of garbage time, also picked up a few more stats to pad all that stuff. From all of those different performances, it was just another weird one from Jack, where because of the seamlessness of that offense, I mean, the 4 goals kind of just happened. The 4 assists kind of just happened. And to me, it was the 1 block, and then obviously the goal in the end zone that Oscar threw. That was the same play. That's the play that we remember. But I mean, it's so weird because I mean, Jack being Jack, when he does those things, it's like everything seems effortless, so I don't remember it. And then the thing you remember is like, okay, he just went to the top tippity top level. I mean, the block was good, sure, it was a 2-handed run through, but I don't know how he even saw that disc on that one-handed catch between 2 guys. Like, I watched the replay, the 2 Boston players, as much as they had a beat on it, Jack still had the flight of the disc timed well. Like, he knew he was going to get at his apex, and he was the one who had the throw was, I mean, perfect to Jack. But it looked like I don't know how he saw it. It looked like they were actually in front of him. They jumped earlier than him. So it looked like the 2 kind of sandwiched him in. And I don't understand how he had the wherewithal to catch it with the one hand that he did and time that. It's an incredible play.
When you are like at the top of your game and you feel like you can do anything, those plays just come naturally. I doubt he even thought much about that. He probably saw it, ran to where he thought he needed to go, just jumped, and he probably wasn't surprised at all that he caught that over everybody. And
Yep.
when you're good in the air and you're used to that, you would be shocked if you didn't catch that. You'd just be like, oh, there were some good defenders there, but I still can't believe I didn't catch it. Like you think you're gonna get those, especially when the throw is for you, as opposed to being on defense where like, oh, maybe I didn't get it. It wasn't really meant for me. Like when it's meant for you, you just go up and get it, and your teammates trust you with that stuff. It just comes so naturally that you don't even really think about it.
Yeah. So with that win to put the final nail in the coffin for that game, with the win, the Empire will be going to the playoffs. 8 wins is enough. Mathematically, they've done it. I believe at this point they are 1 win away, even from getting the 1 seed and wrapping that up and then hosting at home. So there are still things to play for, of course. But let's go through the rest of the East Division. Then we'll end the show with some season leaders because there is nothing coming for the rest of this week as a content note. There is nothing coming the rest of this week. The Empire are off. And then next week we will jump ahead to preview early on. We'll preview that DC game. So before we do that, that's for next week. The standings right now in the East Division, we know the Empire being 8-0 that they are. The Breeze is 4-2. So they play Boston. They play Montreal at home. Let me go through the standings instead. The Breeze is 4-2. Boston is 4-3. Philly is 4-4. Toronto is 3-4. Montreal is 0-7. So out of contention for the 2 playoff spots. We're not going to talk about them. So the Breeze, before they even meet the Empire next Saturday, next Friday rather, they have the Breeze has Montreal at home. They have Boston on the road. Then they have the Empire at home next Friday. Boston at home, Philly on the road, Toronto at home. I think they get at least 4 wins out of that and comfortably grab the 2 seed, because 4 wins, 8 wins. 4 wins, yes, making 8 wins would be enough. So I think whether it's Boston on the road, Boston at home, Philly on the road, Toronto at home, and then no offense to Montreal, but I think Montreal is going to be a win for the DC Breeze at home. So I think from those matchups, they get at least 4 wins there. 2 seed is theirs. Now, Boston has at home against DC, Toronto on the road, Philly on the road, DC on the road, and Montreal at home. So I think even if they lose to DC twice and beat both Toronto and Montreal, which is realistic, that's a 6-5 record with the one wildcard game coming against Philly. Because then Philly has Montreal on the road, Boston at home, DC at home, and Toronto at home. So once again, I think maybe they beat Montreal and Toronto, giving them a 6-4 record. If they lose to DC again, it's 6-5. Once again, putting everything on that matchup with Boston, because the winner makes the playoffs at 7-5 and the loser ends 6-6. Now, the last little wrinkle here, the Rush are interesting because they have Montreal at home and Detroit on the road. That should still be 2 wins to bring them to 5 wins on the season. Then it's Boston at home, Breeze on the road, and ending with Philly on the road. It would take a miracle, but if they did beat Boston and Philly, I think in that situation, they would, in theory, grab the 3 seed. But I do think the lack of experience will hurt them in those pressurized games. And we know that, like, when Toronto has not been good this year, they have not been good. With underline that, and they have looked pretty inexperienced. So yeah, Boston, Philly, this is really, really, really a good race for the 3rd seed.
Before we talk about Boston Philly real quick, I just want to highlight that if the Detroit Mechanics could get their win against the Toronto Rush, and it would just make me so, not even just me, I'm sure it would make 20, 30 of my friends just so happy. So Detroit, I will be pulling for you real hard in that game.
Well, I mean, they lost to Indianapolis by 1. They lost 20-19.
Yeah.
Yes, it was indoors, so the win seems to be an issue for Detroit, but yeah, I mean, it was indoors against Indianapolis, but Indianapolis right now are the 2 seed in the Central Division. They're not a bad team. So if that O-line can operate at home in Detroit, something like that against Toronto, I mean, who knows?
I'm pulling for it.
Could be the moment.
I'll buy a Detroit Mechanics jersey if they win.
I think a lot of people are going to buy Detroit Mechanics jerseys.
Yeah. But yeah, for Boston and Philly, it's hard to say how it could go. I mean, obviously they both have a few games you could win or lose against anybody. They've shown that. Philly, especially with the good win against Carolina. If I had to bet today, I would say I think Philly will make it ahead of Boston. I think they just are a little more clean and put together and dynamic on offense. And then defensively, probably same, but maybe a little more even. But yeah, I think Philly's probably the slightly better team if I had to bet today.
Yeah, I mean, Philly has, of their losses, so many of them have been close. They've really been in them. I mean, the only one, I mean, even against Boston, they were up by 7. I mean, an historic, we'll say, falling apart from the first quarter on for them. And yeah, I think Philly at this moment is the better team, but it also wouldn't surprise me at all if Boston, because again, we saw when things were working for them, when things were clicking, it really can work. That O-line for Boston can really work. And then between Brendan McCann and Tyler Chan, again, who missed the game against the Empire, which was, I think, made the job for the Empire O-line a little bit easier, not contending with Tyler Chan. But again, between him, Brendan McCann, and Rocco Linehan, they've got some playmakers on their D-line too. So it wouldn't be surprised me if Boston took it either, obviously. But yeah, so let's close out the show. Not say real quick here, but it's interesting that the Empire, as you go up and down the season leaders, you'd think that a team that's 8-0 would be leading all these categories. Same thing with Salt Lake. But these are the 2 best teams in the league because not only of their high-level talent, their top talent, where Ryan Osgar with those 6 assists did move into 3rd on the assist leader board right now behind Garrett Martin for Seattle, 44 for him. And then Pavel Giannis, the regular name we always expected to see there, at 39. Mac Hecht having an incredible season at 32. Nethercutt at 29. A bunch of players at 29. Nethercutt, Khalif El-Salam, Max Shepard. So again, some usual faces you'd expect there. Then Jordan Kerr for Salt Lake is down in 10th with 27. For gold, it's again LA Aviators, Sean McDougal with 32. Babbitt right behind him with 31. Again, those 2 goals kind of were a slow week for him. Keenan Lawrence for that resurgent Oakland team, 31. And then Evan Swiatek doing things out in Austin with 30. Then Greg Martin for Philly, Matt Smith, names that we know, Atlanta, Ty Barbieri for Toronto, believe it or not. they with Babbitt and Osgar being up there, I don't think it really tells the true tale of everything. I mean, even Babbitt is tied for 7th on the blocks list with 12 right now. But yeah, I mean, New York is just, they're such a machine that you don't expect to see those names in the top 10. And credit to Salt Lake, actually. They're very, very similar in terms of just not having players too far up on those lists. Kyle Weinberg tied with Babbitt for 12 goals, tied for 7th, rather, I should say. And other than that, like offensively, yeah, you have Jordan Kerr, who's also tied for 9th in goals, but not much of them in those top 10s for completions, plus minus, receiving yards, any of that stuff.
Yeah, they're just very deep, and that's why they got those wins against Colorado. It's not just because of the stars. That's because players 14, 15, 16, whatever, they are contributing. They make a big difference. It's when teams are a little light on firepower all the way down their roster that they lose those close games, just because the absolute stars often need a point or two off, sometimes just to stay as fresh as they can down the stretch. When you play every single O point, there are a few people that are capable of that for sure, but sometimes just getting that 1 point off, as I said earlier, it also gives the defense a different look. Sometimes that just helps your offense keep moving, keep fresh. But kind of distributing out that playtime a little bit in a really hotly contested game where everybody's grinding as hard as they can, that makes a difference. So having the roster be a little deeper offensively and defensively, that's where those teams really separate themselves.
Yeah, I want to give credit, though, to Sean Cannell and Luke Jorgensen. There we go, one of the 3 Jorgensens, that they are both in the top 10 in total yards, and that is where you don't see an Empire player. It's Garrett Martin with the first over 5,000 this year, Pavlianis, Cannell, Mac Heck. So, again, the handlers, like, eating up a lot of throwing yards there, of course. Evan Swiatek doing everything. Jake Radak, another Austin player, slinging it out. Then Jason Hustad as well, who's down in the South Division. Again, I mentioned Luke Jorgensen, Kyle Henke, also for Austin, as then Zeppelin Raunig, who has just been, receiver A, B, or, A1 or A2 for Seattle. So, it seems like there are years where it feels like it's a changing regard a little bit, and then there are years where it feels like it's kind of the same. And really, like the one name, I know he played that one game for Detroit last year, but Mac Hecht is the one who's kind of entered into these numbers. But pretty much it's the same guys. And Garrett Martin obviously is having a great year for Seattle, but they also need him too, and it has not led to a lot of wins. But yeah, I do find it really interesting also that, as we mentioned, other than Nethercutt and Colorado, interestingly enough, on this losing streak now, having lost to Oakland, it is interesting to me that they also don't have like players in the top because they are still a pretty deep team. But yes, without Nethercutt, they just look a little less deep. And then they also, so myopic was that offense around Alex Atkins, an old Devil player, actually, that Anthony Nunez kind of, before Colorado started, Anthony Nunez did tell me, like, hey, there's this kid named Alex Atkins. Like, he's going to be out in Colorado doing some pretty good things. And he's done some pretty good things. Like, he had a layout with like a torn labrum. And it's just absolutely bananas. Like, it just laid out one arm, grabbed it, then like shook it off. And it's just like some banana stuff. But all that leads me to say is that, for those who have AUDL.TV, I know you're excited about the East Division playoff race, but that Oakland, Colorado, LA Aviators one, it's so exciting because I think there are moments where Boston and Philly will be able to say, maybe we didn't deserve the playoffs. Like, I know they're going to say they deserve it, but they're going to be, if they win or lose, it kind of all comes up to them. But for those 3 teams, my goodness, like they're all 3 going to have to sit at home and say, we deserve to be in the playoffs, and somebody's going to be at home.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, Salt Lake and Colorado joined the league and kind of just took that division by storm, and they've been nothing but the best in that division. So it kind of a slap in the face to other teams that aren't necessarily bad. They just got, hey, welcome to the show. The other teams are just a step better right from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you always see a lot of movement between usually LA and San Diego. And again, we've seen Khalif El Salam head back out west, and there's been some different things. And I'm always Portland. We gotta do something, figure them out a little bit. Portland should be better than they are, but yeah, they've been in the doldrums. And it's interesting because there are a number of winless teams. Montreal doesn't have a win. Detroit doesn't have a win, and it's Portland doesn't have a win. And there's the other one who doesn't have a win either that I'm forgetting.
Dallas Legion.
Yeah. So the Dallas Legion doesn't have a win either. So anyway, I think instead of being negative, we'll end on a positive note is that the Empire are undefeated, though, 8-0. And again, next Friday, they face off against DC. So we'll have that preview coming out next week. But I hope everybody enjoys their week. So again, for Pippin, this is Dan. We'll see you soon.